Okay, there we go. Aisha says Akbar's salvation was portrayed like a tapasya. Was it the same or is it dramatized in the Indian culture? Anybody want to respond to Aisha? What is it that we saw in this scene? Huzefa did a fantastic job of explaining the prologue or the opening introduction. But what are we seeing in the first scene? And by the way, let me know if there are any black boxes on screen. Omer,
जी
why was he walking barefoot in the desert? I don't know, you tell me. Ji Ali.
एक तो मैम वो ब्लैक बॉक्सेस नजर आ रहे
आ
हैं
रहे हैं अच्छा ठहरो हाँ आई नो
एंड सेकेंडली जो वो सीन था हमने रीडिंग में भी पढ़ा था थोड़ा उसके साथ मुतालिक बट इतना ड्रामेटिक तो नहीं था वो यही था कि मतलब हमने ये भी बात नोट की थी कि जो मुगल हुक्मरान थे मतलब बिफोर उनके प्रीडिसेसर्स के मुखालिफ जब वो प्रीडिसेसर्स थे उनके जो दिल्ली सल्तनत थी उनकी थोड़ा ये सूफी जो थे उनके खिलाफ सूफी शेखों के साथ इतने अच्छे ताल्लुकात नहीं थे दिल्ली सल्तनत के बट अनलाइक देम मुगल सुल्तान जो थे दे हैड वेरी good relations with these Sufi sheikhs, and that's one of the things that we see in this scene. इसके जो अकबर है उसकी औलाद नहीं थी कोई काफी देर तक ही उसने काफी फतूहात कर ली थी हिंदुस्तान के ऊपर मगर उसकी औलाद नहीं थी कोई तो वो औलाद के लिए दुआ करने के लिए वो एक सूफी शेख के पास जाता है तो उनके पास जाके फिर ये इज्तिमाई दुआएं करवाता है ही यूज्ड टू डू दिस अलॉट उधर जाके वो बहुत ज्यादा पिलग्रिमेज भी करवाता होता था और मतलब ये मैंने पढ़ा था कि आगे आने वाले दिनों में मतलब वो पिलग्रिमेज टू मक्का भी स्पॉन्सर करवाता था और एक स्पेशल शिप भी उसने बनवाई थी बट ही वुडंट गो हिमसेल्फ ही वाज एडवाइज्ड अगेंस्ट इट तो ही वुड also make a pilgrimage to this Sufi sheikh or other Sufi sheikhs in this region so
see
that's
uh,
वो भी सी के उसके लिए वो जाता है
thank you okay let's look at the chat quickly as he walked barefoot as a sign of humility to God since he's presenting himself as a fakir asking for a son. They believed in Sufi practices. He went to Sheikh Salim Chishti because Sheikh Salim Chishti, he believed in his being a wasila or a medium to God. By the way, the black box is gone.
जी
Okay, good.
yes ma'am
The first thing to note is that that scene, that particular opening scene of the movie, is actually quite accurate. As Ali reminded us, we have a lot of primary source material from Akbar's reign. Okay, we know a lot about Akbar. And one of the things that we know from multiple sources is that Akbar undertook pilgrimages to Sufi shrines frequently, especially in his younger years, less so in his older years. And the other thing to note is that, and it's also accurate that he used to go barefoot when he was undertaking these pilgrimages, particularly to the main Chishti shrine, which is Khwaja Muinuddin Chishti's shrine in Ajmer, right? I'm sure you've all heard of the word Ajmer. And Ajmer is famous across the whole region for being one of the chief Sufi centers of South Asia, Ajmer Sharif, that's right. Um, and Muinuddin Chishti is the founder of the Chishti Silsila in India. He belonged to a very small, obscure Sufi silsila in the Afghan town of Chisht. But when he emigrated to India with, by the way, or right in the wake of Muhammad Ghori, he ended up establishing a very major order in India. Not in his lifetime, but he had some extremely popular and successful khalifas, amongst whom are the famous Baba Farid, Ganje Shakar of Pakpatan, जो हमारे यहाँ पाकिस्तान में है. Pakpatan is in southern Punjab. And Nizamuddin Aulia, the Sufi Sheikh of Amir Khusro, who is in Delhi. These guys are the big Chishti Sufi saints who really established the Chishtiya Silsila as widespread and powerful and popular in India. Anyway, Akbar frequently undertook these pilgrimages to Ajmer. You know, after he won a battle, he'd make a Thanksgiving pilgrimage. When he really wanted something, he'd, make a barefoot pilgrimage. Salim Chishti was a living descendant of the Chishtis who lived in a small village called Sikri near Agra. And that little hut on a hill that you see depicted in the film is probably what it looked like there. Unka ek chota sa faqirana sa astana hua hoga. And because he was a living Chishti saint and because he was nearby, Akbar used to visit him frequently. And he only becomes so famous in the story of Akbar is because Akbar attributed the birth of his first son to Sheikh Salim Chishti, which is why he named him Salim. Salim is the given name of Jahangir. Not only did he name the child Salim, he moved his capital city from Agra to this little village of Sikri. He built a brand new city, gorgeous, magnificent royal fort and city from scratch, and named it Fatehpur Sikri. And spent quite a lot of time there before he abandoned it for various reasons. Okay, so that is Akbar's personal involvement with the Chishtis in particular. The other point to note is that this was very normal and common. There was nothing unusual about Akbar's reverence for Sufi sheikhs. And there was nothing unusual about his pilgrimages. I want to move on to that, but before I do, well, maybe let's do that actually. We can come back to historiography later if we have time. No, that's not what I want. Okay. Anybody want to guess what or who this is a picture of?
Jahangir.
Jahangir. Okay, anyone else? Could be Jahangir. Aurangzeb, Akbar. Give me some reasons for your guesses. Sheikh Muinuddin Chishti is one guess. So, okay, let's first describe the picture. Yes, the white beard is a bit unusual, right? We don't associate that with the pictures of Mughals that we see. But before guessing a specific identity, let's look at the component parts of this picture. So describe it. What do you see? And I'll be immensely grateful if someone could actually talk. Yes, Ali.
Uh,
Okay. Somebody else was speaking, I think.
Is somebody else speaking? I didn't see anybody speaking. Is someone else speaking? Come.
Yeah, I was
Jahan.
saying that इसके ऊपर जो है ना there are I guess angels और इनके
चलो
जो
यहाँ पे
सर हैं जो
angels
काफी
नजर आ
अजीब
रहे
से
हैं,
बने हुए हैं.
हाँ, some weird winged creatures,
Yeah,
और क्या नजर आ रहा है? I mean, just describe the obvious. Let's put words to the obvious.
there's a sun behind his head.
Yeah, so there's a guy. He's got a white beard. He's got a turban. He looks like he's holding a tasbih. He's got this weird golden disc that looks like a sun, maybe behind his head. Okay, what else do you see? Some people say it's Noor, some people say it's the sun, some people say it's a halo. Or Jyoti.
Yes, you could see the man is wearing all white clothes, and the angels, I think, because they have wings in the picture above the man.
Okay, what's he sitting on?
It, probably his
What does it look like?
a tuck. I
Tuck?
guess to see that
हाँ, और किस चीज का बना हुआ है?
gold.
He's sitting on a golden throne. That's a footstool for coming up and down, right? So he's on a elevated, raised golden throne, which is why some of us may have initially thought that this is one of the kings. This elaborate gautakiya on the golden tuft, the gorgeous carpet, you know, the angels watching over, the halo, huh? Thank you for pointing out that out. That's really what I wanted you to see, the halo. The stool is not for visitors to sit on, it's a footstool for stepping up and stepping down because this is quite high. It's high because this person needs to be elevated up above everybody. So these features, the throne, the angels, the halo, they are common to depictions, artistic depictions of, okay, let's look at another one. Look, your sun halo, who's this?
Shah Jahan.
Shah Jahan. You got some angels here. Can't see them clearly. Here are his courtiers. This is actually Shah Jahan. Look at it, standing on the earth. And I think this is the Bundela Raja finally subdued, is bowing in submission at his feet. To show you a few more. This is a depiction of two, again, the halos and the takht-like elevation, although there's no takht here. This is supposed to be Abdul Qadir Jirani, and this is Muinuddin Chishti in conversation, although they were not really contemporaries. And these are lesser, lower level saints and disciples. This is also an important thing, the jharoka or the chhatri, the covering, only kings or sovereigns were entitled to it. Here we go, there's another one. We don't know who this is specifically, but it is a depiction of the mythological Qutub of the age. Now, this is part of the very developed Sufi philosophy and hierarchy of the 15th and 16th centuries, where within the Awliya Karam, there are many levels. And at the very highest level of the Awliya, is one chosen wali who is the qutub of the age. Now, what does that mean? I don't really want to get into it to a complicated extent, but the idea was that the highest soul of the age was responsible for the well-being of the earth and all humanity. He had, which was very similar to, analogous to the reign of a king. But his responsibilities and his authority were purely spiritual. And in that sense, that placed the Qutub of the age above kings. And as Ali and Huzaifa reminded us, in India, in the age of the Delhi Sultans absolutely recognized not just the spiritual authority, but the social influence of living Sufi sheikhs, and wanted their approval and alliances with them. It was a big deal for a king to get the official backing of an important Sufi sheikh. And Sufi sheikhs were not very keen on giving those stamps of approval in those times. But by the Mughal era, they were. And a certain close collaborative relationship developed between the ruling family and certain families of Sufi sheikhs. Now think back to the Baburnama, right? Think back to the passages I had you read. Twice, well, there are many, but you read two instances of Babur revealing his relationship with his main Sufi sheikh. Does anybody remember those two instances in the Babur Nama? Who is the main Sufi sheikh Babur looks up to, and how does he appear as a character in the Babur Nama? ख्वाजा उबैदुल्ला एहरार, ठीक है। कहानी क्या थी? दो थी।
उमर शेख मिर्जा।
जी शाहन, उमर शेख मिर्जा तो उनके अब्बा थे। Yes, Aisha. He had a dream when he was running for his life. And in the dream, the sheikh came, guided him, and saved his life. So it was a visitation. It was a spiritual experience. And everybody doesn't have these visitations and spiritual experiences. The whole point of noting it down is to establish a certain grace and favor and preference shown to Babur by the Sufi sheikh and therefore by God. Huzaifa, once he was sick, he started writing a poem in the sheikh's praise. It was his zikr. He healed himself through a exercise of spiritual and literary therapy. He put all his energies and time and focus on composing this beautiful praise piece to his sheikh, and that healed him. All right, I'm going to jump around a little. So I am going back to these guys. One sec. I'm going to return to this slide many times, but it's complex. There's a bunch of things going on here which eventually allowed for this. For Shah Jahan, the grandson of Akbar, to be standing on the earth where the earth's axis or qutub should be, and having a halo around his head, right? Sacred kingship. How do we get here? Starts in really Humayun's time and is fully articulated by Akbar's time, and then never really goes away till the very end, till Bahadur Shah Zafar in 1857. But in Akbar's time, some very interesting things were happening. To begin with, the the role and concept of Sufi sainthood had elevated or become elevated in people's minds and in cultural values beyond anything it had ever been before. So you remember this slide? We've seen this before. Uh, can anybody remind us what was happening here? What is this about? It's about what happens after the Mongol invasions. What happened after the Mongol invasions? Yes, Ifra, you want to? Sarah.
So the Mongol invaded, and then they destroyed the Abbasid Caliphate. So there was no longer a caliph, and then there was this power vacuum which was filled up by the Sufi sheikhs, whom the Delhi Sultanate leaders looked for in terms of providing legitimacy for their rule.
Right. And this is happening across the Muslim world, okay? Across the Muslim world, there is a crisis of leadership. And Sufi sheikhs step into this to fill this breach. So not only are they spiritual leaders, they also become increasingly powerful in a worldly sense. Why? Because those with worldly power, whether they were kings, princes, generals, ministers, businessmen, traders, big tribal chiefs, landlords, right? People with money and power were very keen for blessings and the sanction of legitimacy from important Sufi sheikhs. And therefore, as you can imagine, important Sufi sheikhs were actually able to exercise a great deal of power. And they were also in the position of being arbitrators, right? Because हर किस्म के लोग उनके पास आते थे, उनको मानते थे. So now we come to the more complex question of sovereignty. I've asked you this before, but I'm going to ask again. Can someone please tell me what sovereignty means? What does it mean to be sovereign? Independent authority, okay. To be able to defend their empire from Mongol conquest, that is not sovereignty. Supreme power, yes. What else? To be not dependent on anyone and to have people dependent on you, legitimate. Okay, let me ask a different question. In the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, of which you and I are citizens, who holds sovereignty? Where does sovereignty lie in this polity? Allah. And then, how does Allah exercise sovereignty in the Islamic Republic of Pakistan? Who are the agents of sovereignty? Political representative से पहले कौन आता है उज़ैफ़ा? Prime Minister, law, political representatives, Prime Minister, law, Parliament, इन चीज़ों से पहले कौन? The people. Thank you. Because it's a democracy. So in modern democracy, sovereignty rests with the people and they vote, right? And their voting ability is what gives power to governments. What is the concept of sovereignty in a pre-modern world, the world that we're dealing with? Before the Mongol conquests in the Islamic world, sovereignty resided with the unbroken succession of caliphs. But unbroken, yes, but divided nevertheless. You had a couple of chains of transmission of leadership authority from the Prophet. There were the Shia Imams, there were the Shia Ismaili Fatimid caliphs, and then there were the Umayyad and Abbasid caliphs. For how large the Islamic world eventually was, that's not too many. And all of them traced their sovereign authority back to the person of the Holy Prophet. The Imams disappear. The Fatimid Caliphate is destroyed. And eventually, the last man standing, the Abbasid Caliph, is also destroyed. Now what? That's when, well, politically what's happening is you've got lots of warrior chieftains, the Mongols themselves, these guys, the early Delhi Sultans in India, what are they? They are warrior chieftains, mostly of Central Asian, but sometimes of Afghan tribal backgrounds. They're not particularly concerned with making caliphal claims. They're very down to earth and their ambitions are very material. They want military, political, and economic control over territories. Once they start settling down, however, the issue of legitimacy keeps popping up. Why? Why would you imagine that happens? Why couldn't the post-Mongol sultans have just carried on without having recourse to any kind of Islamic legitimacy? क्या ज़रूरत थी उन्हें? Warrior chiefs did take over the responsibility to uphold Islam, but why? Conflict with the Sufi sheikh who had more influence on the population? Sometimes. But just think of the practical problem. What's the practical problem? Why do you need to make yourself legitimate? Were they dying to be loved? Okay, why does legitimacy help power? everyone had the same right or claim to leadership? Yes, that's true. So there was a lot of competition, and that's one reason why the more things you had in your favor to assert your right to be a king, the better. Less likely to be overthrown. Acceptance from the people, yes. There are less rebellions, yes, exactly, right? So if you don't achieve some kind of acceptance and therefore legitimacy in the eyes of the people you rule and whose lands you want to control, at any moment they can organize and get rid of you through a show of force. So it's very, very difficult to hold political control over a large area, even a small area really, but especially a large area, if it's purely by force. Holding anything purely by force takes a lot of money and energy, and you can never relax. So once you've captured something by force, then you need to strike roots and you need to pacify the place and stabilize your control. So the efforts to stabilize control require the people you're ruling over to accept your rule. And then you have to find ways to make yourself acceptable. One of them is fairly straightforward, that you deliver, right? That you perform the functions of a good government. And pre-modern rulers were well aware of that. And the other arsenal, the other weapon in their arsenal was this. They could and did resort to seeking divine sanction and divine legitimacy. And the only people who could confer this on the sultans of the Islamic world after the Mongol invasions were the great Sufi sheikhs. So this goes on for a couple of centuries until the rise of the Safavids in Iran. That's the eventual extent of the Safavid Empire. Right, huge border with Mughal India, if you will see, right here. By the way, most of Balochistan was part of the Irani Empire. Okay, does anybody know anything about the Safavids? Kaun the? Kahan se aaye the? How did they rise to power? Anas?
I recall that so their origin was of like the Iranian or the Persian side of the world, and I'm not exactly sure, but some mention that it's Kurdish, and that's one thing I know about the Safavids.
What did you say? Kurdish?
Yes.
Yes, that's right. They actually came from the, right here, the furthest sort of northwest end of the Iranian plateau, Ardabil, which is Azerbaijan, and they were Turkish speaking. They were Kurdish and Turkish speaking. Anything else? Does anybody know anything else about them?
They sort of Safavid Empire ki sort of they had a clash with the Romans at in the western side, Anatolia के पास, or maybe I'm mistaken कि उनका जो उस वक्त उधर Turkic principalities थी उनके साथ clash हुआ था, but they also sort of expanded towards the west. उन्होंने empire इस तरह किया था eventually.
Okay, so जी हुज़ैफा.
तो जहाँ तक मुझे मालूम है शायद ये पीरी मुरीदी का सिलसिला था इनका, और फिर ऐसा हुआ कि आहिस्ता आहिस्ता इनके मुरीदों की तादाद बढ़ने लगी और फिर इन्होंने ख़ुरूज कर दिया अमीर तैमूर के जाने के बाद। लेकिन ऐसा हुआ कि इनको मुतअद्दिद शिकस्तें हुई, लेकिन जो इस्माइल सफ़वी है उसने किसी तरह कामयाबी हासिल कर ली और तबरीज़ और आगे पीछे के इलाके में हुक्मरानी कायम कर ली अपनी, और उसके बाद ये सिलसिला चलना शुरू हो गया सफ़वी सल्तनत।
Thank you. Yeah, so they began as a Sufi order here. They're not even from Iran. Their founder was not the 12th Shia Imam. They reinvented themselves eventually as 12er Shias. And by the way, before the Safavids, Iran was not Shia. They were Sunnis, yes, initially. They later claimed to be Sayyids and descended from the Imams. अच्छा, तो यहाँ पे there is Sufi order that rose to prominence in the region. They became what Sufi orders, by the way, at this point were often becoming, which was local landlords as well. And therefore they commanded a lot of manpower and loyalty. Specifically, they had as their murids an entire Turkic tribe, warrior tribe, called the Qizilbash. And so they had an army. Red cap, Qizilbash just means wearing a red cap, okay? So they had fashioned this headgear, which initially they called a Taj-e-Haidari. It's when they're reinventing themselves as Shia. And they had an army of murids. So in the chaos of post-Timurid Asia, when all the Timurid princes are busy fighting with each other, there's a time for opportunity. So these Sufi sheikhs, enterprising and ambitious, with this army of murids, because the entire Qizilbash tribe is their murid, start to take over land around their base. And as Uzaifa said, it didn't happen overnight, but eventually they had one particularly enterprising leader who became the first Safavid Shah, Ismail I. He managed to carve out an empire, a large territory for the Safavids. And then they moved their capital. Where? Does anyone know where they moved their capital? They did not stay here in Ardabil, which is like a backwater. Where did they move their capital? Tabriz, yeah, Isfahan, right in the center. But Tabriz is a secondary city of theirs. It's an older city though. Isfahan is what they really, do Google it and have a look at some of the gorgeous buildings. Anyway, now what do we remember about our friend Humayun? What happened to Humayun? Now remember, these guys are all more or less contemporaneous, right? In 1501, Shah Ismail Safavi establishes a Safavi kingdom in the Iranian plateau. 1526, Babur establishes the beginnings of a Timurid state in North India. Humayun ran away, ran for his life, chased out by Sher Shah Suri, and eventually found refuge at the court of the Safavid Shah. The Safavid Shah is, of course, delighted to have a Timurid prince at his beck and call and beholden to him. And there are all these episodes, recorded episodes of the humiliations in a way that Humayun was faced at the Safavid court. And yes, one of them, he had to convert, not necessarily, the more important thing, right? Ab hum conversion kehte hain, right? We talk in terms of forced or official conversion to some public religious identity. That was not so important in those days, and certainly not to the Safavid kings. What Humayun had to do was accept official discipleship or muridi under the Safavid Shah as sheikh. The Safavid Shah is still a Sufi sheikh. He is both. So the Safavid Shahs are the first ones who truly, fully, then, I mean, they don't invent this, it's happening in pockets across the Islamic world, but they're the ones who really bring to full manifestation or fruition this idea of the Sufi sheikh and the worldly king being one and the same person. So Humayun actually had to wear this Taj-e-Haidari. This was a very common practice, by the way. Dastar bandi abhi tak hoti hai, where in order to officially, formally be given discipleship under a Sufi sheikh, the Sufi sheikh would tie a turban on your head. That is him giving you discipleship. So yes, Humayun had to accept discipleship. Let's not get carried away on the tangent of why the Safavids became 12er Shias. You're most welcome to explore that on your own. We are far more concerned with the fact that the Safavids were practicing Sufi sheikhs with a large following of murids who also became sultans. And they continue to exercise their authority by holding these two different kinds of authority together in the body of the emperor, right? That one person brought together and represented two very different streams of power. Can you imagine the kind of authority the Safavid Shahs would have wielded in their own region with an army of murids? You remember this? This was the Qizilbash accepting muridi of the Safavid sheikh wasn't some, simple swearing in ceremony of a, parliamentary ministers aajkal kalte hain. It's a really, really serious commitment. So our friend Humayun sees this. He also has his father's example from Timurid Central Asia and the Timurids' very close relationships with the Naqshbandi Sufis. Khwaja Ubaidullah Ehrar was a great Naqshbandi. And thirdly, look at this. So we've just talked extensively about Sufi sainthood as a model. I want you to come here now and pay a little attention to what we call the cosmological sciences. This is a world very different from ours. Here is where context and being able to step into the context of 16th century Asia is really important. It is a world which is still full of mystery and magic. It is a world where your sheikh visits you in your dreams and you know for certain that he actually visited you. It is a world where every day most people watch the movements of the stars because they truly believe their lives depend on it. It is a world in which everything is a sign or a symbol or an omen of greater supernatural forces circling around the material human world. That was accepted reality. So if that was accepted reality, then people spent a lot of time and effort in developing methodologies for deciphering the great hidden mysteries of the universe. And astrology was by far the most popular and highly sophisticated of these cosmological sciences. And everybody did it. And they've been doing it since the very beginning of Islam, okay? Humayun in particular was especially concerned with the cosmological sciences. So that is his own temperament. And then there is what he learned at the Safavid court. When he finally came back and established his own court again in India, he instituted these really complex rules and systems of etiquette for his court that were all dictated by the cosmological sciences. So, for instance, on Saturday, which is the color of the planet Saturn, one must wear black and use black. The wearing of black creates hebat. This is why the Prophet wore a black hat. This is what Humayun believes, okay, not what I'm telling you. Abu Muslim, the messianic leader of the Abbasid revolution, also had a thing for black. So on and so forth. Sunday is the day of the sun, you wear yellow. And now he divided his days and his work also by types of people. So Saturday and Thursday was auspicious for working with spiritual people. So Saturday is related to the planet Saturn, the protector of sheikhs and ancient lineages, which means ancient spiritual lineages. Also, Thursday is associated with Jupiter, which is the planet of the Prophet's family and religious scholars. So on these days, the king meets with his managers of the system of knowledge and worship. Sunday and Thursday, people of dominion, because this is the day associated with the planet Mars. So he meets the soldiers and the generals. People of desire on Monday, associated with the moon. So he met with the artists, so on and so forth. These are just some of his rules. Of course, the planets align with the heavens, right? The belief is that human beings live in a very low level of perception and reality, and that there are many layers and layers of greater realities around us which we cannot see. And the whole reward of being on the path of tariqah and rising up through these spiritual steps of the ladder is that you keep piercing the veil of more and more layers of reality in the universe outside of the very mundane material reality of our daily lives on earth. This is just to give you a taste. So here we have Humayun, who really brings the cosmological sciences and their presence in the courtly life of the Mughals makes it much more central. It was always very present. Everybody had court astrologers. The Delhi Sultans had them, the Abbasid caliphs had them, the Mongols had them, the Timurids had them. But to take it to this level was unusual. And actually, after Humayun, nobody quite went this crazy. But nevertheless, it was established as common, safe, royal practice. So Akbar actually employed astrologers from many different backgrounds. He had, sort of people versed in ancient Iranian astrology, he had the Arabic Islamic astrologers, he had the Indian astrologers, and they all worked together. And then we come to another very interesting but coincidental thing that happens at the time that these post-Timurid powers are rising. They are all rising in the 10th century of Islam. All of this is happening in the 900s of the Hijri era, which is the 1000th century, right? 1000th, century of Islam. So, and in fact, the actual year 1000 Hijri fell in the middle of Akbar's reign. But the whole 100 years leading up to it, right, from the year 900 Hijri to 1000 Hijri, the entire Muslim world is full of cultural and spiritual movements that are expecting some kind of massive change to occur, that there's something spiritually magical about this number, कि 1000 साल पूरे होने पे कुछ बहुत बड़ी चीज होगी. So in the subcontinent, for instance, you have a couple of successful movements. You have the Mehdavis in Jaunpur. You have the Roshaniya in modern day KP and Afghanistan. You have the Safavids themselves were also had these millennial claims. There were a lot of legends and beliefs associated with the Islamic millennium, where the very old concept of a Mahdi or a savior was expected. Sometimes that concept mutated into the idea of a mujaddid or a renewer, जो इस्लाम को जदीद करेगा. But everywhere there was this expectation that some millennial figure will rise to lead the new Islamic millennium. And then there were many contenders to that position. One of them was Akbar, who made a very explicit claim to be the Mujaddid of the second Islamic millennium. Why was he able to make that claim? He was able to make that claim because he was already building up his political influence through acting out on what his family had learned from the Safavids. He was using astrology and the cosmological sciences to prove that he is the chosen one. The Akbarnama is a very large book, but almost the first 1/3 of volume 1 of the Akbarnama, that's like many chapters, about 6 chapters, are dedicated only to a detailed description of all the cosmological and astrological signs at Akbar's birth, which indicated that he was going to be the sacred being of the millennium. It's all very veiled and not said, very bluntly, but it's using, it's plucking on those strings and kind of pushing those buttons which people in that time would have understood. Now, what do we mean when we talk about a theater of rituals and symbols of spiritual legitimacy? So that's one of them, right? What happens in a court? When you imagine a grand Mughal or Safavid or Ottoman court scene, what do you imagine? Jyoti?
Masali, we have a...
Yes, it's 2:45. Off you go. This is all we're going to be completing. Sadly, we don't have time for the rest. And I will complete it on Thursday. We've got 2 tutorials this week, so please join. I will hold a couple of voluntary review sessions next week, and I will announce them shortly. Okay? Take care.